welcome.
I know you had an active day.
Like that, you know?
How was your day today? Where have you been all day?
I've been all over the city of Los Angeles, in Crenshaw, in Venice, San Fernando Valley, back this way again, back to all parts of LA, East LA.
I know, I got your email for your e-blast. You had like 7 events today.
At least.
I mean, is that how it's been for you for the past, I don't know, like a couple of months?
It has, and in the midst, my husband was texting me because Thomas was playing baseball today, my 9-year-old. So he is the first in his league. I'm a proud parent, okay? He is the first in his league today that he's catcher to throw a man out on third base when he tried to steal. I was just blow by blow this morning. So,
I mean, how do you really manage it? I mean, how do you manage motherhood, being city controller, and, you know, running for mayor, and you have a young son? I mean, he's not even in high school. How old is he?
9.
He's 9, okay. So how do you manage all that?
I take a deep breath. You know, the great thing is he's known no different because I've been an elected official since he was born. The others, I have an incredible husband. And he loves going to events and things. He loves going to fundraisers. He loves going to church. He loves, you've seen him. He enjoys that. And I think he is a more social, educated child because he's grown up knowing that Los Angeles is this great place and this diverse place. So, but there are days when you think you're not sleeping.
Okay. So as you know, we all gather here today to talk about the creation of a Black agenda on behalf of Los Angeles and to create a covenant. I'm going to ask you some questions actually from the BCCLA covenant, but to create a covenant that the community can hold our politicians accountable to for the betterment of ourselves and our generations to come. So why don't you share with us an opening statement about the importance of a Black agenda for Los Angeles and how you support that effort?
Well, this is incredibly important, and this is one of those days that I would have loved to have come here all day because I saw the speakers that you had and the various panels and the dialogue that was happening about Black agenda for Los Angeles. Many of you know that my first job, and I don't know if Olivia made it today, but Olivia Mitchell was, she's here, okay, Olivia was my first boss, working in the Mayor's Office of Youth Development for Tom Brown. And the Black agenda then was about ensuring that our young people had a good education. The Black agenda then was very similar today, about good jobs. It was about ensuring that no one got left behind. And so today's discussion is not only about creating that agenda together, but it's about creating an agenda that, yes, we can be held accountable for. Because it is important that it's not just about what you say when you're running for office. It's why I'm so proud of the kind of support that I have received in the African American community, because I've had an agenda that I've been working on with the African American community from my days and working for Mayor Bradley and creating LA's best after school program, so kids have a safe place to go, to working on housing issues and homelessness, where we find that there are more African Americans that are on the streets of Skid Row than should be. That we have a city where the unemployment rate is higher in the African American community than other places. That the kinds of loans that when you look at foreclosures, those issues need to be addressed in the African American community. But what's important is the next mayor is going to be someone who's got to be able to roll up their sleeves and get it done. Who's got to be able to have the experience of ensuring that we hold our general managers accountable. We'll talk a little bit about this in our discussion. But what I've been able to do is, even as a city controller in my audits, of looking at minority and women-owned businesses and the fact that we don't do a very good job at all in holding our general managers accountable, that organizations and entities get a piece of that pie. That we're not holding people accountable to make sure that the kinds of upward mobility within our city employees and the leadership is with the African American community. And making sure that all of our commissions and other places have that kind of representation. So I could go on for a very long time, but my commitment to the Black agenda, the African American agenda, is not only what I plan to do in the future, but what I've done in the past. That all of my jobs and experiences have demonstrated I focus on the issues that are important. Housing, economic development, education, and making sure that everyone is part of the solution and not left behind.
You seem to have a lot of endorsements from the Black community. How did you not only develop a strong relationship, but how do you interpret these endorsements from different civic leaders, different political leaders, for instance, with the religious leaders? Do you have an understanding that their constituents supported them in their endorsement, or is this a personal endorsement? So how do you understand the endorsements, or interpret the endorsements of the Black community, the Black leaders and the civic leaders of the Black community?
Well, you know, it's a validation of that I'm not just coming into the community and talking about these issues when I'm running for office.
Okay.
You know, everyone knows how old I am. Okay, I'm 52, because you can read it. I'll be 52, actually, May 23rd, 52. I've been working in Los Angeles and in the African American community since I started working for Olivia Mitchell at 17 years old. And that is about delivering. Not about in front of cameras, not in front of, about delivering. So when Magic Johnson endorsed me, he stood up and said, I'm endorsing Wendy Greuel because she's been here in the community and helped us create jobs. She's been someone who's been willing to stand up and make sure her voice is heard. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who I've known forever and was with this morning, about the importance of helping women and making sure we're dealing with the issues of child care and after-school program. To Mark Lee Thomas, we're talking about mental health issues and making sure that we have health care. These are individuals and the bishops and pastors who I have prayed with, who I've been there to talk about what is important to their community and ensuring that someone in the mayor's office gets that too many of our young people are in gangs and feel they don't have options. That too many of our schools have the highest dropout rate. That 42% of our kids in 3rd and 4th grade don't read at 3rd and 4th grade level. And so I think the endorsements are just a validation that I have been focused and attentive to the issues that are important to the African American community, and they know that I'm going to do it in the future.
Okay. And this, back up a little bit. So share this a little bit about your background. You're born and raised in Los Angeles. You're a lifelong Angelino. So share this a little bit about your background, your upbringing here in Los Angeles.
Well, you know, my father was born here as well in Hollywood. Went to Hollywood High. My grandfather moved here from Illinois many years ago and started a business 66 years ago in the San Fernando Valley. So we made our home in the San Fernando Valley. And I went to public school.
So a Valley girl?
I am a Valley girl.
Did you talk that way?
Oh, it is. If you looked at the LA Times yesterday, you saw not only my high school picture, you know, my senior picture, but you saw me in a cheerleading uniform. And my son looked at that last night and he goes, Mom, is that you? And
I should have made you
yes.
do a cheer. I know that. I would have made you do a cheer. There was a great opportunity. This was a time in high school in the late 70s. Busing was happening. You know, we were one of the first schools that had busing. Living in a community where you could walk to your school, you didn't even think about it. You didn't think about that you would walk to your neighborhood public school. So I went to Knollwood Elementary, Frost Junior High, and John F. Kennedy High School. Public school, and that's why I'm so focused and attentive on public school. My son goes to public school. But I always thought that I would run our family business, a building supply and trucking company. That's why I learned how to drive the forklift and the 10-wheeler truck, and I knew how to do the accounting and knew something about wallboard and corner bead, things that most people don't know about. And then I met Olivia Mitchell and Tom Bradley. And at UCLA, that changed my life. That was your introduction to public service?
That was my introduction. I was student body president of my high school, but it was meeting Olivia and the mayor, and I jokingly say that I fell in love with Tom Bradley at 17, in a good way. I fell in love with him about public service, and that you could give back by being involved in government. And so, you know, my history was there. When I graduated, I thought I was only going to be there a couple of years, Olivia, and there I was 10 years later, still working on the issues that were important to this community.
Okay.
And then went to work for President Clinton and Henry Cisneros at HUD, doing national homeless programs, working on economic development, and ultimately was asked right after the Northridge earthquake, when I helped get about $1 billion with Cisneros and President Clinton focused in on this region. They said, would I come back? And I did that before being recruited to work at DreamWorks Studios. I thought I died out of heaven going to DreamWorks Studios. And it was a wonderful job where I learned a lot about the entertainment industry. I learned a lot about the jobs that they're creating. I learned a lot about the fact it is our iconic industry and our signature industry. And took everything I had learned in all of my jobs to say the industry has to change. And so we did partnerships with, at that time, Concerned Citizens of South LA. We funded an animation program. We funded an animation program also after school at LA's best schools to tell kids that learning can be fun, but it is also knowing math and science, and that's how you become an animator. We funded programs that were looking at vendors and how we diversify the industry, because we all know this industry is not diverse enough, and it was something I did while I was at DreamWorks. So I took the Black agenda, the African American agenda, into every position that I've had. And then, of course, ran for city council, and now I'm city controller.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, all of those experiences, I believe, when people talk about the differences in this race, those experiences have shaped who I am. Those experiences have shaped the fact that I believe I can hit that, the ground running immediately and have the experience of private and public sector experience and a demonstrated history.
Okay. So you often talk about being the taxpayer's watchdog. Elaborate.
Well, the city controller is a position that most people don't understand. They read in the paper that I've audited something, and I just have to tell you, out of the 153 employees I have 13 auditors, only 13. And out of those 13, they do a great job. We've done 89 audits. But I'm also responsible for payroll. I'm also responsible for the financial reporting and vendor payments. But we try to use the audits as a way to change how the government is doing things, to make sure that our money is being spent effectively, because we all pay more taxes than we want to, and we all want to make sure that the taxes that we do pay are being used for the right purposes. And so I've identified not only things we could do differently that would save us money in the future, but I've identified things we've done in the past that we've lost money and we shouldn't ever do again. Everything from how we utilize cell phones, that not every city employee needs to have a cell phone, that we could have a better plan, to looking at animal services. And the fact is that if you get a dog tomorrow and you get your registration, you pay $15, $20. And then we expect you to know every year that you're supposed to send us that $15 to $20. $1.2 million that could be spent to fix our streets, could be fixed to be able to fund more programs for the gang reduction programs, our libraries, to looking at making sure that our departments are run effectively. And so, as city controller, I stick to this number because people like to give me a hard time, but it is a tip of the iceberg, $160 million of waste, fraud, and abuse, things that we could do differently and things that we could do in the future to save money.
Now, you're obviously running for mayor, so how do you feel being the city controller gives you an advantage or disadvantage to your running for mayor?
I definitely believe it gives me an advantage on a couple of levels. I manage my department. I have executive experience. I'm one of 3 citywide elected officials. And every day you don't read about payroll, you don't read about my vendor payments because I'm just doing the job. It's a position where I have looked underneath the hood and said, here are some challenges. I've taken on some of my allies and some of the status quo. And that has led me, I believe, to be in a position to lead Los Angeles, and it is unique as to being the controller and understanding the financial status of the city, being the person who has said the emperor has no clothes. We cannot spend more money than we have. And I can give you several examples of where I've said, look, council and mayor, you haven't looked at this issue in a way that ensures that we have fiscal stability in the future. You haven't looked at this in a way that demonstrates that you understand the ramifications. I've had a balanced budget. I've actually, every year, not spent as much. I've saved money, given it back to the general fund. I've given ideas on ways in which we can ensure that money is getting back to the general fund. In the last 24 hours, my opponents give me a hard time about money that has been found that needed to be reimbursed to the city council. Well, in fact, the reason that it's in the mayor's budget is because the general manager of that department looked at the recommendations I had for his department, looked at the recommendations I had for grant programs that he had, and said, I need to look at this special fund, and in fact found that $42 million. That's why there's $42 million in there, because I laid out the plan of how we needed to look at grant reimbursements. And I'll continue to do that as we're looking at the 600 special funds that exist in the city's budget.
So what made you decide to run for mayor? I mean, you're city controller, you've been just with, Robert Zemeckis. So what made you decide to take the challenge? It's a major challenge. I mean, you're going to be the first woman, if elected, for the city of Los Angeles. What made you decide to do it?
Well, I believed it not only was it about time to have a qualified candidate who also happens to be a woman, but I believe I have the opportunity to change Los Angeles, to lead Los Angeles forward. And I bring this book with me because we spent a lot of time on it. It's called Leading Los Angeles Forward. If you haven't seen it, it's on my website as well. We've been handing out, we've mailed it. 36 pages of how Los Angeles can be fixed, on how we can do things. But I decided to run for mayor because I could be at my kid's baseball game today. I would have been running for controller. I could have run for one more term. I probably wouldn't have had an opponent. And I would not be sitting here probably. But the city is at a crisis point. The city is at a point where we need a strong leader. The city is at a point where we need someone who has the experience to lead Los Angeles forward. The city is at a point where we need to make sure that you have someone who's not going to forget African American community, not going to forget the Latino community, not going to forget our children, and that our future is the fact that we have to deal with our issues of education and jobs.
Excellent. We're going to talk a little bit specifically about the Black community here in Los Angeles, and what I'm going to use for my foundation, it is a mayoral candidate covenant that was presented by the Black Community Clergy and Labor Alliance. If you aren't familiar with the BCCLA, Dr. Milana Cray is the co-chair. Reverend Eric Lee, who used to be at the SCLC, is the now chair. They have created a covenant that they presented to both mayoral candidates. As a matter of fact, all three mayoral candidates. I think they presented when Jan was in the race. And so they had they had actually 10 agenda items. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read you a little bit from the preamble, and then I'm going to ask some specific questions that the BCCLA, in terms of their action items, and ask you some questions regarding some of their critical issues. So from the BCCLA, we, the Black Community Clergy and Labor Alliance, we recognize the critical role of the political process plays in this and need for communities and candidates to come to an agreement to realize the interests of both and to cooperate in pursuing and achieving a common goal. In the past, however, too often politics has been essentially transactions of convenience for candidates and community leaders and or personalities without adequate involvement of the community and concerns for its interests. This has led too often to confusing and conflating class interests with mass interests, group concerns with community concerns, and personal benefit with collective benefit. We hold the position that support of any political candidate, must be based on mutual respect, mutual benefit, and the common good expressed in mutual commitments. Thus, political candidates who seek our support must recognize and respect our interests and endorse our list of vital interests and agenda. Below are a minimum list of vital interests and the terms of mutual agreement. I'm going to ask you some questions from their terms. And theirs, similar to ours, we have 7 that we address here today. There's our employment, housing, transportation, economic development, education, legal justice, and health, similar to the ones that we addressed earlier. So in terms of employment, here, one of their commitments that they're asking the mayoral candidate to be committed to is an increased emphasis on recruiting, training, hiring, and retention practices to facilitate equitable representation of Black workers in every contract and or taxpayer-funded project in the city of Los Angeles.
Well, and we, both of us filled out this form when we did our interview. Let me tell you, and I did mention this audit, so one of the things that's important is one, not only about the employees in the city of Los Angeles and making sure, as Tom Bradley did, the importance of ensuring the diversity of our employment. And you saw in that time that you had a large increase in the number of African Americans who came and be able to work in the city of Los Angeles. But it's not just about at the lower level, it's ensuring that there is the promotional opportunities. And I sat recently with members of the Employee Association in Los Angeles, and particularly city employees, African Americans, to talk about the fact that we have some at the highest level and some at the lowest level, but we're not doing what we need to do, which is training and ensuring there's mentorship and ensuring that there's upward mobility within the city of Los Angeles. So it's about employees, it's about commissions, making sure that we have commissioners at every level and every single commission that exists in Los Angeles. John Mack, who has been president of our police commission, is as a supporter of mine, as we were talking last night about the importance of ensuring that the police department is responsive to the African American community. That only happens, maybe not only happens, but I think it is better, and it happens when you have representation of the African American community in each of those commissions. It's also, the third piece of that is about the kind of contracts that we have in the city. And I did an audit on the minority and women-owned businesses, as I mentioned earlier. And the fact is that we are not doing a very good job. The city is not doing a very good job. It's a tone at the top. We did an audit that showed that 35% of the instances, the general managers of the department had exemptions from having a good faith effort of ensuring that you hired minority and women-owned business firms. And as Floresci calls it, Floresci Hogan rules, it's not the good faith effort, it's a good fake effort. We have to change that. And I'm gonna hold, and that's the reason, as you talk about why being controller is so important. It's about accountability and it's about transparency. We can do better. And that's something I will do as the mayor of Los Angeles. So it's about employees, it's about commissions, it's about making sure that we also have the jobs and the contracts going to the businesses within the city of Los Angeles. And the last piece of that is about Hire LA. I want to start, and you'll see this in my book, to remove some of those bureaucratic challenges to Hire LA, whether it be MTA, whether it be on city projects, because right now, there's nothing that says we give you a priority and that is really sticks there that says you hire from Los Angeles. We are going to have a number of transportation projects, I know we'll talk about, that are going to be here in Los Angeles. Billions of dollars. We want jobs to go to the people who live in LA. Let's have a Hire LA program. That's critically important. And the last final piece is my administration will be representative of the city of Los Angeles. It will be, as it was when I worked for the mayor, that African American community at high levels will be part of the decision making, the strategy, and ensuring that the community is engaged and the stakeholders are engaged in solving the problems that face our city today.
How do they do that? How will you do that? How will you incorporate the voice of the stakeholders?
Well, it is everything from neighborhood councils to working with many of the nonprofit organizations that serve the African American community. It's making sure you have the kind of advisory groups that are working on issues, not only from a geographical area, ethnic as well as specific to homeless, looking at housing issues, looking at childcare issues. Those are the things that we're going to engage the public. I have had office hours. I remember when I worked for Mayor Bradley, we had Meet the Mayor Day. And not only did we do it in City Hall, but we did it all over the city of Los Angeles because people can't necessarily come down to City Hall. Let's make sure we have it in the community. I participated in Mark Willie Thomas's Empowerment Congress. How many of you participate in that, which is huge. And I think that those are the ways that you ensure that the voices are heard.
Okay. And we know some of the most powerful positions are general managers in City Hall.